Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. The trial of a non-Indigenous man who admitted to killing 4 Indigenous women continues in Winnipeg. Jeremy Skibicki's defense team is claiming he is not criminally responsible due to mental illness. Testimony from a DNA expert and a request by the Crown for a mental assessment were discussed in the courtroom today. With more, here is T.R. Wheatley, and a warning, some details in this report you may find disturbing.
Crown prosecutors called to the stand a DNA analyst from the RCMP National Laboratory in Ottawa. Inside the courtroom, Florence Celestine appeared on a big screen. She testified that for about a year she examined over 100 exhibits consisting of muscle tissue, clothing, shoes, pillows, cups, and blood, particularly from stains around the bathroom where Skibicki told investigators he killed all 4 women. Celestine said she wrote 12 different summary reports relating to DNA for this particular case. She explained this is more than what is considered an average crime scene, where normally she said she does up to 4 reports on her findings. All of the exhibits were gathered after Skibicki was arrested on May 17, 2022 for the murder of Rebecca Contois. It was later during his interrogation he admitted to also killing Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myron, and Buffalo Woman. Defense mentioned during cross-examination they also have their own DNA expert, adding the comment, "Our expert confirmed your results." Crown prosecutors also asked the judge on Tuesday to order a psychiatric assessment for Skibicki to see if he was suffering from a mental disorder at the time of the killings. Since defense has made capacity an issue, the Crown can now legally request an assessment. Defense was opposed, but Chief Justice Glenn Joyal granted the Crown's request. Court heard it could happen as early as this weekend. Up until now, there has been no mention by either side of whether or not Skibicki has even had a psych assessment. For the rest of the week, the Crown is expected to call another handful of witnesses, including regular civilians and Skibicki's estranged wife, who in the past has talked about his escalated violence that led up to her leaving him. T.R. Wheatley, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Thanks, TR. For more on this trial, you can head over to our website, aptnnews.ca, for stories by web reporter Kathleen Martins. And if you're triggered by this report and trial, supports are available 24/7 through the MMIWG 2S support line. That number is 1-844-413-6649. RCMP in Manitoba are investigating the homicide of a teen girl. It happened in the Chemawawin Cree Nation in Manitoba, 450 kilometers north of Winnipeg. On Monday at 1:25 a.m., RCMP were called to a nursing station in the First Nation where a 14-year-old girl was suffering from serious injuries. She was pronounced dead when officers arrived. RCMP determined it was a homicide. They've charged Kingsley Lachosse, a 19-year-old male, with second-degree murder and failing to comply with a release order. The Northwest Territories fire season is already proving to be an active one. Multiple road closures and telecommunications issues continue in the south and near the Alberta border. This was the scene over the weekend for drivers headed north from high-level Alberta to Hay River in the Northwest Territories. Along the British Columbia NWT highway, a similar situation. The Dene Métis community of Fort Liard is under an evacuation alert after strong winds pushed the fire just 19 kilometers southwest of town. Fire crews have been focused on protecting structures, and while the fire hasn't crossed the Liard River, it is still considered out of control. The territorial government held its first press conference this afternoon to discuss preventative measures, such as infrared scanners on planes.
We've also used reports from the public to inform our action. We use, now that the snow is cleared off the ground, something that's going to be important for us as well is going to be satellite detection methods, remote sensing. So that's something else we use. And of course, we use a network of detection towers and cameras, largely with 360 cameras on them. All of these methods will help us discover fires.
Talks between the Woodland Cree First Nation in Alberta and Obsidian Energy's CEO seem to have fell through after a recent meeting at a hotel in Peace River. Woodland Cree First Nation Chief Isaac Lubacan Avram and his council, along with Obsidian Energy President and CEO Stephen Lucas, were both seen walking out during their very brief meeting on Monday. In this video from reporter Brandy Morin with Ricochet Media, a councilman said there was no intent on Obsidian Energy's part to negotiate. In another video, Obsidian CEO walked out the back door only saying, "Rangers in 6. It's been more than a week since the Woodland Cree First Nation set up a traditional camp and blockade on an access road used by Obsidian Energy to one of its oil well sites. Woodland Cree leadership wants Obsidian Energy to come to the negotiating table. They want a fair share of the profits that the company is making from drilling on their traditional territory." A court injunction was issued against Woodland Cree last week. However, Chief Lubacan Avram placed it in the fire pit. So far, RCMP has chosen not to enforce the injunction. At least 14 other First Nations are showing their support for Woodland Cree, including some non-Indigenous industries. Well, we'll have more on the very active wildfire situation coming up after the break. Stick around. Welcome back. First Nations leaders and business professionals gathered in Winnipeg to discuss economic growth and opportunity. Sierra Bettens reports on the first ever First Nations Economic Forum.
Financial literacy, nation-to-nation trade, Indigenous-led policy reform. These are just a few of the many discussion points at today's First Nations Economic Forum. Here in Winnipeg, First Nations business professionals, leaders, and entrepreneurs from coast to coast are gathered to strategize and discuss economic opportunities. Harold Kalla, the executive chair of the First Nations Financial Management Board, said the conference was inspired by the economic growth driven by the First Nations Fiscal Management Act.
More and more First Nations became involved in seeing economic opportunity that was before them and began to pursue those kinds of options. What we started to see as a result of that is how we could benefit from sharing our experiences and how we might create a united voice to advance the ideas that we saw that could reduce the impediments and support economic development.
During the question period, many participants brought up the Nawe Udina redevelopment project in Winnipeg as a site of economic opportunity. In late April, construction commenced on the repatriated lands. Upon completion, it will become the largest urban reserve in the country. Guy Dumas, a longtime business leader and tribal economies advocate, comes from Matthias Colum Cree Nation. He traveled to the conference to network and learn how other communities are tackling economic development.
We have a lot of businesses and enterprises going on right now. There's still a whole lot of room to grow. And I came here to meet some people and talk to some people about what they're doing in their area, because I'm fascinated by all of this, and there's some brilliant people here.
During group discussions, Dumas brought up policy reform, questions of ownership, and procurement of digital assets as key considerations.
It's time for radical change, not just incremental change, but radical change that will create that critical mass that we need throughout Indigenous country to change our economy. Because I know we have the capacity, we have the skills, we have the know-how, we have everything that we need to create this economy that we desperately need to have.
On Tuesday, the conference wrapped up with more participant-led discussions about economic growth. While this marks the first forum, Kalla says it will be one of many to come. Sierra Bettens, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
A graphic novel published by the Métis Council of Canada has outraged the Manitoba Métis Federation. As well, the Métis National Council says the novel is cultural appropriation. But a Halifax area university professor disputes that characterization. Angel Moore reports.
On the shelves of this university bookstore in Halifax is this graphic novel called Rocking Spurs, the Anti-Bullying Tour. The book is about Kalani Simone, an Innu Métis artist from northern Quebec. It tells the story of how Simone fights bullying on social media, especially because she identifies as Métis from Eastern Canada, as she explains to her friend in the novel. They claim that anyone identifying as Eastern Métis is a race shifter and doing it for benefits, tax evasion, and money. The novel was unveiled during this event at Dalhousie University back in March. It was the brainchild of history professor Lisa Binkley. Binkley says the project encouraged her students to discuss bullying and identity.
We were discussing these ideas of Métis-ness or mixedness that are sort of prevalent in the media these days, and a lot of the misunderstandings. And I wanted to give students a class that really considered some of these ideas because, we're hearing the word pretendian, we're hearing that, the Eastern Métis are a myth.
Cassidy Caron is a president of the Métis National Council. She disagrees and says there's no such thing as Eastern Métis communities.
Our communities come from the historic Northwest. There is no such thing as a Métis Innu community, and we stand firm against this fight against the Eastern Métis. So our reaction is strong. We don't support the book. We don't support the work that the Métis Nation of Canada is doing, and we will never condone this.
Rocking Spurs was a result of Binkley's class called Métis History and Culture, and the book does give a history lesson from the emergence of Métis people in Canada from the mid-1600s in the East, the migrations through Quebec and Ontario, and the rise of the Western Métis in the 1800s. David Chartrand is the president of the Manitoba Métis Federation. He says this description of Métis history is false.
To state that the Métis of the Red River migrated from Eastern Canada, from Nova Scotia, that we migrated over there and we found our way in the prairies is absolutely absurd. It's insulting, it's damaging, and it truly will hurt a lot of people.
During the book's March unveiling, Binkley claimed copies of Rocking Spurs will be given to high school libraries across Canada.
We'd like to also thank the Canadian Race Relations Foundation that generously supported its publication. We were able to hire a professional artist and print out 1,500 copies that are going to be, they're being delivered as we speak to all Canadian high schools for their library.
However, Caron wants all the copies of Rocking Spurs recalled.
It should be our Métis governments who are telling these stories. It should not be these false Indigenous bodies who claim to represent Métis continue to spread this misinformation. So we will be taking action and reaching out to the school boards that have accepted these books.
The Toronto Catholic School Board District confirmed to APTN News Rocking Spurs was received and is currently under review by the Indigenous Education Department. And the Toronto District School Board did not reply by the time the story went to air. As well, Dalhousie University declined to comment on this story. Chartrand says that is problematic.
But this also draws the question to Dalhousie. How serious is your procurement policy on the promise of assuring us as Indigenous leaders, Indigenous nations, as the Red River Métis of the West? How secure is your policies to ensure that you're not allowing this to happen again?
Binkley, however, defends the message in the book.
I think students need to learn how to talk about it, and they need to know how to understand the politics that are going on between the various Métis nations and those that are self-identifying as Eastern Métis or Métis when they're not part of one of the recognized groups in Canada.
Angel Moore, APTN National News, Jabuktuk, also known as Halifax.
Well, meanwhile, an Indigenous Identity Fraud Summit kicked off today in Winnipeg. It's a two-day gathering for Indigenous leaders to talk about how false Indigenous identities affect their communities and what can be done to change it. Here's Sav Jonesa with that story.
A video highlighting infamous pretendians greets you just before entering the Indigenous Identity Fraud Summit in Winnipeg. Names like Buffy St. Marie, Grey Owl, and Joseph Boyden bring light to how many generations the issue spans and the level of prestige they were granted while living a lie.
Because these people are after our rights, they're after our resources, and they're after an opportunity to take from us what we have suffered and waited for so long to get to.
Co-hosted by both the Manitoba Métis Federation and the Chiefs of Ontario, the rampant issue of people pretending to be Indigenous brought together some First Nations, Inuit, and Métis leaders from across the country to the closed two-day event in Winnipeg. Mi'kmaq lawyer Pam Palmater spoke about how widespread the issue is.
We have hundreds of cases in the Maritimes where they're like, do you ever watch Jurassic Park and the raptors keep testing the fences to see where the weakness is? Yeah, and one eventually gets out, or a few of them. Well, that's what pretendians are doing.
She says individuals and groups claiming one First Nations ancestor from hundreds of years ago does not make someone Indigenous today.
Do you have a relationship with a grave from 400 years ago, or do you have a relationship with a community, a nation, an extended family of kin? And I think that makes the difference.
And it's not just individual cases of politicians and celebrities looking for clout. Manitoba Métis Federation President David Chartrand says it's nations and organizations wrongfully claiming land, hunting rights, and financial resources in the modern age.
If you look in this country, there's no nation, Indigenous nation in Canada, that has not bled for their rights, have not suffered for their rights, have not actually fought vigorously for their rights, and have a culture and history to protect. There is no First Nation, no Red River Métis that has not gone through that. People should simply ask the question to the Ontario Bill 53 legislation citizens, tell us your history. Where did you bleed? Where did you go to war? Where did you die? Where did you suffer? What did you go through to go what we've gone through to get where we are to protect ourselves?
There was a large focus on the controversial Bill C-53, one that would recognize and give effect to treaties of certain Métis governments. Various First Nations leaders and the MMF have contested the inclusion of the Métis Nation of Ontario, or MNO, in the bill, who they say have a faulty citizenship process and claims areas not historic to the Métis Nation. Suffice it to say, the MNO was not invited to the summit. In a press release, they say, in part, this exclusion undermines the potential for a comprehensive and inclusive discussion on this critical issue affecting all Indigenous communities in Canada. Sav Jonesa, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Well, we'd like to hear what you think about the Identity Summit. Here's how to continue the conversation. If you have a comment or story you want to share, you can send us an email to news@aptn.ca. To read and watch our stories, you can go to our website, aptnnews.ca. You can also find us online on your favorite social media sites, including TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, and X. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. Coming up after the break, a preview of tonight's episode of Face to Face. Stick around. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. This pair of mallards was spotted in Saint Laurent, Manitoba. The photo was taken and submitted by Jacques St. Goddard. Thanks, Jacques, for that. Be sure to send your photos to share@aptn.ca if you'd like the chance to be our next photo of the day. A new episode of Face to Face debuts tonight, and our guest is longtime producer and filmmaker Lisa Meaches. Over the past 4 decades, Meaches has produced countless acclaimed films and television programs, including Ice Road Truckers, TP Tales, Taken, and many more. But she says in the beginning she was mistaken as an extra and not a producer.
At the time, they couldn't believe an Indigenous person would be a producer at a budget at that level. And we were going to eat lunch at Craft Services. And the head of Craft Services was telling me to go outside and eat with the extras, where the extras that were playing the chiefs in the movie. And my co-producing partner was standing with me, and he says to the crafty, she's the boss. She's the lead producer on this movie. And he was so embarrassed, and I remember being that aha moment.
And you can catch that episode with Lisa Meaches right here in about 2 minutes' time from now. And a reminder to catch our new newscast that airs Monday to Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time each day. Tomorrow, the new host of that show will be taking over, and I think they may be a familiar face to many of you. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Tuesday. I'm Dennis Ward. I'll see you back here on Friday. Or C. McGuinch, thanks for tuning in. Have a great night.